Welcome back to the Budding Author Podcast, where we're talking to authors about their journey. Today we have a very special lady, J G MacLeod. Hello, Jen. How you doing?
Hello. I'm well, thanks.
Very good. Great to have you with us. We see on Twitter that you have 89,000, nearly 90,000 followers on there. That's a good one to kick off on. How did you manage to get 89,000? That's like amazing.
Yeah, when I was maybe 2,000, 4,000, 10,000, that was kind of mind blowing for me. So it does feel a bit surreal sometimes. It takes quite a bit of interaction and obviously time to try to get to know people, and there's a whole kind of marketing side to that, just my involvement on there and my assistance of other writers and stuff. But yeah, it's quite rewarding to see that, people are obviously interested in my account, and it's nice.
That's nice, yeah. I think from my point of view, I've been very lazy on social media, and I've sort of challenged myself to sort of engage more with people and that sort of thing. Obviously, with the new show, I think sort of there's something more to engage with. Do you find it difficult sort of promoting yourself and promoting your books? I always feel a bit sort of shy to say, oh, please buy my book sort of thing. It feels a bit weird. What do you think?
Not as much now. So I published my first book in 2018, and I would say that I was like that at first. Even when I would go out to see family and they would ask me about my book, what's your book about, that kind of thing, I felt embarrassed, shy, just all those feelings of being introverted. And now I'm much more confident to say I'm an author, and it's just shifted, I think, over the years, but it did take, a growing interest in this whole craft and more time, I think, to plant my feet and get a good foundation before I felt that confidence.
That's really good for me to hear, because I think I'm at the start of that journey, and it does feel a bit awkward when I'll say to my sister, say, "Oh, have you read my book?" And she's like, "No, no, it's okay." And then I've had the conversation with her, say, "Oh, you're going to read my book? Do you want a copy of my book?" And she says, "No, it's not my kind of thing. It's okay." And then 5 minutes later, she'll post something on Facebook saying, "No, this is a super book I've just read, and it's not mine, obviously."
Oh, it's somebody else's. Oh,
into somebody else's book. Jen, just sort of taking things back a little bit, what inspired you to start writing to start with, and when did it all start for you?
I've always written things, so it's been a lifelong kind of thing. I was one of those kids who always was reading and writing, and as I said, introverted, very shy. And I wrote a lot in school as a kid, and then I started to write fiction things probably when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. I wrote I think I was inspired by C.S. Lewis and, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that kind of fantasy type of world. That was my initial kind of, thing that inspired me. And I started to write just short stories and small series when I was a kid. I always knew I would publish. It was just a matter of when and having everything fall into place at the right time. So when I got, older and more established in my teaching career, and, I'm an English teacher, I just just sort of merged.
Do you still teach, Jen?
I do, yeah. So I teach students who would be around 17 or 18. I know the grades are a little bit different depending on where you are, but that's grade 12 here in Canada. So I teach all grade 12s, and I teach writing, and then I teach an English literature course too. So yeah, I've taught for about 22 years now.
How did your students react when they found out you were a writer in the early days?
So it's kind of interesting. They know I'm an author, they know I'm published, but they so far have not been able to find me. So at school, they know my first initial, they don't know the G. And for some reason, that's why I don't ever say what that stands for, because so far I've been able to keep my author life private from my students. And I think that's been very freeing, because then I can write what I want to write and not worry about what the school board will think. And, especially since it's a romance genre, I just like to keep it separate. And it's been possible so far. Even with the internet, they haven't seemed to be able to discover that. So far, so good.
So far, so good. Well, hopefully, I was just going to say, we don't want to spread this around too much then.
Exactly.
The romance genre is a funny one, particularly for men to write. For the romantic and the love scenes is sort of difficult. And is that something that comes naturally to you, or has that been an area you've struggled with?
No, it comes naturally to write it. Where it doesn't come as naturally is deciding how you want to market the book. So I always come back to that. And that's what I have more savvy on now that I didn't at first, was trying to figure out, just because you can write something doesn't mean that you want to keep all of it in certain books, because you have to figure out who are you marketing it to. So some books, even with romance scenes, the scenes can be edited in such a way that you can market it differently. So I'm not a young adult writer, but certainly I would write it differently if I was. And even some of my books, like my very first book, was much more graphic than later books that I've written. So I edit down. I have an editor who does part of that too with me. And we just decide who's the target audience for this, what age, what experience, and then we go from there.
I think that's where I made a huge mistake. My first novel was a little too graphic, and my mindset for my target audience was not really set. So when everybody I knew realized, oh, Simon's written a book, we'll have a look at this book, and then they're reading it and they're going, whoa, this is a bit heavy. And I think I switched a lot of people off because of that.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of kicked me back. I've gone back since and re-edited and pulled the heat level sort of right to the floor, really. And knowing how difficult it is to write romance, I've sort of moved to the sort of YA sort of area. But I think we all make mistakes, don't we, as writers? And
absolutely, yeah.
There's
two ways I like to think of what you just said. I think there's two ways to think of it is, you didn't necessarily write the wrong thing or the wrong heat level. It's just, if we're going to market to family, there's a different comfort levels, which is why it comes back to wanting a separate professional life versus my school and teaching career. But the same with family. When I had to have that moment when, your parents are going to read something that you've written, eventually, my children are getting older and asking, when can we read Mom's works? So I don't think that the heat level is necessarily wrong. It's just who are you marketing it to? And your family is essentially pretty small in terms of that pool. So it might not have been wrong. It just might have been wrong for the people closest to you, because they don't want to know you that way necessarily. And I had to bridge that and not stop myself from writing those things. So I had to get more comfortable with the fact that this is what I'm writing, and some of the books are more graphic, some of them aren't. And if you're going to buy every book that I write because you're family, then you just have to, deal with that. And I don't make as many apologies now or feel as embarrassed about it. But I was like you, I think I kind of altered the way I was writing a little bit at first, and then I came full circle again, and now I just write how I want and how I need to. Yeah.
I think maybe it was hardest for my wife, because I think my wife felt a bit embarrassed because of the sex scenes in it, that people would think that it was based on our relationship. And so that was a tricky one. What would you say? What would you say has been your biggest challenge so far, or your biggest mistake that you've had to overcome?
Biggest mistake. That's hard. I've I've learned a lot and grown a lot, but I keep challenging myself. So every time I do something and I don't think it maybe went as well as I hoped, I just try something new the next time. So I've been good at not stopping. I think some authors, if they do something or it doesn't have the result they hoped for, it makes them question their own talent or abilities. And I've never done that. It just might not be good for marketing. Like, maybe it's just not popular. But the one thing I did was, with my first trilogy, I based it on real historical characters, like people who really existed, and I made a fictional world out of it. And I won't say that's a mistake, because a lot of people really enjoyed that. But I felt like I wrote myself into a bit of a wall because I didn't have the creative license, because they were real people. So I did a ton of archival research and historical research, but I couldn't fictionalize it as much as I would have. And so my change was that after that, I decided I wanted to create my own characters, and that way I could take them wherever I wanted. And that's kind of The Future Bride is exactly how that kind of progressed. That series is completely based on stuff that I crafted.
Yeah. I think creating characters in your own mind is the wonderful thing about writing, isn't it? To be able to create your own world. And that's such a wonderful thing to do, isn't it? Is that sort of one of the main drivers for yourself, to go into that world and create a world?
Yes, it's such an escape. And that's why I like to write romance too, because there's the possibility of a happy ending or a happily ever for now kind of ending. And I think we need that kind of escape. And, you can leave your life behind when you're writing it too, and kind of get lost in that. And it's so enjoyable and inspiring and hopeful. And I think creating the characters just adds to that, because I've based them on my family research and family tree, but I've set it so far in the past that none of us obviously know those people. So it becomes fictional, even though the research, again, for Future Bride was all like genealogy and stuff like that.
Got you. Okay. Looking sort of back in that sort of element. Got you.
Yes.
I'd sort of targeted more the sort of futuristic side of things.
Oh, cool.
The story in my head and sort of developed. I think you're probably a plotter at this point, aren't you? Where did you start off as a pantser and then go to a plotter?
No, I've always been somebody who just knew how it was going to start and end. And I would always have maybe 3 or 4 plot points that were major that they had to reach or hit. And then the characters just get there. So I'm a good blend. Plantser, I guess, is what we call ourselves.
Yeah. I think that sounds very much like the teacher within, doesn't it, though?
Absolutely. Yeah. The characters, like just the other day, I kept saying to people, I'm 2 chapters away from finishing this book that I'm writing, the final in the Future Bride series. Well, those 2 chapters ended up being, 5, 6, 7, 8 chapters, because the characters weren't cooperating. And, they were having side arguments, and they weren't getting to where I needed them to get quite as fast as I'd hoped. But the scenes were good, and it was more natural than what I had anticipated. It just happens organically. And I think I've kind of come to just allow that to happen. And you get there when you get there, and your editor takes care of the rest.
It's quite funny, really. Just hearing you saying that sort of speaks volumes, really. We can all have an idea of what the story is, and until the characters take over and decide how it's going to be.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's how you've created good characters too. They become alive.
Yeah. That's brilliant. So, have you always focused on the romance genre?
No. So my very first work, it was called Abalone. And it was, you could say it still counts as romance, because again, it has relationships, it has a love story that develops, and a happy ending. But the whole probably first 3/4 actually focuses on domestic violence in a non-romanticized way. So, nothing to say against Colleen Hoover, but it's very different from the approach she's taken in some of her works. It's gritty, it's dark, it's realistic. It's not trying to paint a picture that this is a good thing. It's actually a warning call to young women to know the red flags. So that's very different. I feel like I had to write that book just to kind of purge some things in order to be able to write comedy, to be able to write pure historical romance and stuff. So it was a bit of a journey to get from 2018 to now, but necessary, and I learned a lot from it.
I think, is it important for you to have a particular message in each book?
Yes. Not always that I 100% know ahead of time, but it feels like everything I write has some kind of social commentary built into it. Again, sometimes it's the characters, sometimes it's just maybe it's the setting where it's going to take place. But a lot of my reviews have said that too, where they've noticed this social piece in there. One of my degrees is in history, and social history was my favorite. So I don't think it's a big surprise that creeps in, but not always planned.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's good. You mentioned you're sort of more of a plant sap now. What's your total process, and how long would a book take, start to finish, for you to create?
When I first started, they were taking around 4 to 5 months, from the writing to the editing.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, so I published 3 books in 2018.
It took me 4 years to produce my first novel.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but I'll be honest, I went into a different type of classroom in 2016, trying to do the math here. And I don't think, again, it's accidental that I was able to write 3 books probably within a year and a half. And then I sent them to my editor, and I just published them all the same year in 2018 with a few months between. But so normally I would say around 5-6 months, but
that's really good. That's really good.
Yeah, and I published 3 other books in 2021. So it is a bit of a pattern when I look at it, but then there's been this huge lull. I don't know if it was sort of leftover melancholy from the COVID shutdown, or I don't know what it was, grief, loss, a transition in my job, just taking on new roles. But I kind of was stuck until December 22nd. Another author from Twitter who had some really sage advice said, maybe it's because you keep thinking of this huge book, or 100,000 words or 50,000 words, and it's too daunting, because if you don't have more than an hour at a time, you won't do anything. And I think that was true. So she said, why don't you just write 1 sentence a day? Just one. Anyone can do 1 sentence. And so it kind of freed me, because between December 22nd and yesterday, I had written 40,000 words. So it worked. That would be putting it mildly. So shout out to Lily for her great advice. It just kind of frees you, because I think, again, we're all busy. We have other things going on in our lives, and there's never the perfect time. But I could do 1 sentence, and then 1 sentence, obviously, I would sit sometimes for an hour, but I think because it was so small, I never felt pressured. That nanomore thing that they do where you have to do 50,000 in November. I've never participated in that. I feel like that's daunting.
NaNoWriMo. I did that 1 year, and it was quite intense. But it worked for me, so I did it. That was my second.
Oh, that's awesome.
I got all the first draft down. How detailed are your first drafts, Jen?
So I don't edit as I go. I just write, and then I do probably 3 or 4 of my own edits before I give it to an editor. So they would be just, again, kind of organic, the whole story, dialogue, everything. I mean, it's not poorly edited, because I have an English degree. So, I mean, it's indented, paragraph, there's punctuation. It's not as rough as some of the stuff that I edit for other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I would call that pretty detailed. My current work is, I don't know, maybe 320 pages. And even with the editor, she might cut it down to 300, but I know that it'll probably fall in around that range.
Yeah. I think the decision for an editor is quite a tough one, I think, because as a new writer, you don't want to be spending too much money on the whole process, and an editor can be quite an expensive resource. I know you do some editing yourself, so maybe that's a challenging question. But at what point would someone need to transfer over to that?
It should be an editor themselves. Is that,
No,
or to get an editor?
To sort of to have an editor. When do you think?
Yeah. So my personal belief is everyone should have an editor, no matter who you are. Even the most famous authors have editors, so I think that should tell us something, because an editor's not just there to catch your, the periods that you miss or some spelling mistakes. We have, word processors that will catch some of that, although they miss things. I just think it's sort of the developmental editor, the person who notices inconsistencies or gaps, or, oh, the person's eye color suddenly changed, or, you changed the spelling of the name. At least those are the kinds of things I find in other people's writing. So I just think everyone should. And if you can't afford a really expensive one, maybe become part of a group where people at least help edit each other's work, at least one draft, that kind of thing.
We did that with my writing. I joined a writing group, and we would edit, sort of have a read through and do critical editing, critique. 10,000 words, 10,000 words a month each of each other's work, and that worked quite well. But the group sort of fell apart, sort of thing, before I'd finished my book. So I restructured and brought some new people in and created my own writing group. So then went through the whole book again. But I think so the editor is the first person that you'll show your work to then. Is that correct?
So my editor is both what you would say beta and an editor. She does both. She's sort of a critique partner, and then she edits it after. So she would do both. So it can be 2 stages where I just get feedback on the ideas, the content, make some changes, and then she does any of the other stuff that I've missed. And that's it's worked for me. I find the process, she's fast. She doesn't edit professionally, sort of outside of a handful of people. So the turnaround's fast, which is nice.
Yeah, I think would you say the economical version of that would be to be part of a writing group, I guess?
Yeah, if again, like everyone's budget's different. Editing requires a very specific skill set. So the writing group is a wonderful resource if you can't afford it. But again, an editor who has a resume where they maybe have done this professionally, or they took courses, or they have a lifetime of experience, what you're going to get from that is going to be different. So I edit every day in my career. And so 22 years later, and I think I have a skill set, which is why I do it professionally and offer it for a fee. But I understand that it's not easy to come up with that money, and so do what you can, trade, help out. Yeah, it's a good thing.
Sort of sharing reads with other people and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The developmental sort of stuff. I think it's a difficult balance, because you've got a as a beginning reader, you've got a profit and loss situation. I mean, where you've paid for an editor and pay for your book cover design, for example. So then how many times are you going to go through a process where that would be a loss before you're going to start building up? I think it's a difficult, I suppose it depends on the confidence you have.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think too, again, some of that you can learn. And so maybe the loss that you experience with your debut, your first book, is not as significant, or sorry, is more significant than your fifth book, because you've learned some things. You're not going to make the same mistakes. My biggest mistake, you asked me about mistakes, not with the writing part, but my biggest mistake was the advertising part with my first book. I lost a lot of money because I had no idea how to get an ad to work. So that has changed. I think I now understand marketing and advertising, and I know how to place ads that actually work for me. So where I don't spend more than I make anymore, it doesn't happen. So what I invest, I get back more in royalties. So I think that's not easy for people, especially if you're somebody who's just, it's their first year in this. Maybe they feel embarrassed to ask. Again, my account is there. If people have the link, I'm always happy to answer those kinds of questions. So on X, people who are mutuals will DM me questions, and I'm a teacher by trade. I want to help. So you can learn how to do this yourself, and you can get better at it and gain that confidence. So
I went down the line initially using Pro Writing Aid.
Okay.
Which I think helped to a degree, but then when I got used to it, I started arguing with it and saying, no, I don't want to change that. And I think with everybody, I think, and you're probably the same, when you look back at your first book, you go, oh, that's awful, and you want to change it, because that was the same with me. My first book, as I mentioned earlier, the heat level was too high, and there's so many. Even though I'd spent 4 years editing, re-editing, going through 2 writing groups, I then started reading it again when I reviewed it sort of a year later, and it was like, oh no, I've got to change this. So then they say don't go back, don't they? They say, oh, just let it go and just leave it. But sometimes you can't, can you?
The problem with it is that I have so many new ideas that if I were to go back and try to rewrite things, my first book isn't the one that I actually would rewrite if I could. It's very strange in a way because it's very poetic. So I am not a poet. I teach a bit of poetry. I maybe write 1 poem a year when I have a day where I just need to write a poem, but I am not a poet. I write prose, always have. It's what I like to read, although I enjoy reading poetry. But there's something about Abalone that's poetic. There's scenes in it where it feels like a poem, just, certain scenes. But my other works are not like that. And so I don't know that I would rewrite that one. Again, I think it's the first trilogy that I would change, simply because I wouldn't maybe root it in things that I couldn't change, where I felt a little helpless. I didn't feel like I could play with the history as much as I wanted to. I was a bit stuck in a certain time, and I don't think I would choose to do that again. I'm not one of those people that would write a Tudors or a specific, you see all the time, they're running a specific period of history with real people, and then they base it off of that. I don't think I'll do that again, or not in the near future. I have too many other ideas.
You want the freedom for your characters to develop themselves.
100%. Yeah. It's way more fun, I find.
Well, that's it. It needs to be enjoyable. I think we within the romance genre, a lot of romance is very formulaic. Do you run with that, or you try to break away from the typical romance?
No, there were some authors on Twitter. We were in sort of a DM chat group, and they mentioned some romance authors. I knew none of their names. I had never read them. I have read very few pure romance books in my life. Again, I grew up on fantasy. I was a Tolkien fan, still am. That was, what inspired me. The first romance I ever read was Anne of Green Gables, because my grade 6 teacher recommended it. And he said, that's actually a romance book. So I read it, in the whole series. But I don't read romance books. So when I write them, I don't write them formulaically, because I don't even know what that would look like. I write from the heart. My characters do what they need to do to get to the happy ending. And it's, again, there's that social commentary that real life enters in. I write contemporary romance. I write historical romance. I write comedy. the whole range, but there's no formula. It's going to happen the way it's going to happen.
That's great. I think I found the same. I found the same that I didn't particularly pick a genre. I just had a story that I just ran with. So my futuristic story, it has sort of romance, action, drama, and thrilling aspect as well. And in one of the trilogies, some horror as well. It's sort of all around there. So it's sort of a full bag. So when you're going on to the Amazon categories, what you put it down as, it's like, that was my challenge. Hang on, what have I written here? What is this? Yeah.
It's hard. These mashups, right? We talk about that all the time. How do you market that? Because it's not just romance. It's there's maybe some sci-fi, horror, or whatever you just named there. You know, who's going to read that? Who will like it the most? I guess you then have to pick 2 or 3 of the keywords that match. But that's the challenge I find too.
Well,
yeah, Future Bride is time travel, karate, comedy, romance, historical fiction. And then in the third one, you realize it's science fiction, which is going to be the big twist. So how am I going to choose 3 terms for that? It's going to be hard.
Quite often if you mention sci-fi to people, a lot of sort of people who like dramas and romantic relationship dramas and that, you mention sci-fi to them, it's like, oh no, I don't want to read sci-fi. But it's like an Earth-based futuristic world is not sci-fi, but is sci-fi sort of thing. So it's
sort of, yeah. That's so true.
Talking sci-fi, AI, how do you think that's going to affect things, or how is that thing?
You had to ask the question. I'm the hashtag no AI, so this is gonna get interesting. I don't use it, never have. I've never used Chat GPT, never used Grok. Sorry, Elon. I don't want to feed it any of my soul into it, because that's my brain. That's what it's for. I switched in my teaching career this year to having my students go pen and paper, because last year everything sounded like a robot, and I was tired of having to run it through the program that checks. And so they are back to pen and paper, and actually the class average has gone up. So their brains work.
Fair play to you. Fair play to you. That's fair play.
Don't use AI art. I hire artists. I save up, and I actually pay people to draw for me. I pay for everything. It's time consuming and costly, but I at this point, this juncture, I'm a big no for AI.
Yeah, it's a big challenge going forward, I think. Some of the other authors I've spoken to have sort of mentioned it as a concern of theirs, sort of having parts of their work sort of copied almost. Final question. Would the majority of your books, are they sold through Amazon or is it elsewhere?
Yes, it's the best platform for me, because as soon as you get, say, 2 or 3 books in a series, you can create a box set, and then the KU read, so Kindle Unlimited, makes you more money. So just a little piece of advice for new authors: you'll earn more on that than sales, and it's quite lucrative. So I'm again, probably in February, going to publish the 3rd book in my Future Bride series. And then I'll, in a year after that, probably collect them. And Kindle Unlimited, is helpful. But the second most is in-person events. I encourage people to have in-person contacts. So, sometimes you can sell 40 or 50 books if you have the right venue, if you book somewhere. And people like to meet real authors. They like you to sign their book and talk to them. So
I have a couple of comedy moments for that. You mentioned Kindle Unlimited, and that worked very well actually for me. There was one guy that was going to do a mutual read for me, and And then he said he got it on Kindle Unlimited. He read the whole series because he enjoyed it that much. So that was nice. And yes, that is nice to see the Kindle Unlimited sort of numbers flying in. And my biggest problem is the majority, well, I say all the people I talk to are saying they really love my books, and I've had some really nice reviews. But just not enough. I just need more traction. And I kept away from ads. I did try ads a little bit, but when you've only got one book, you're only selling for one book, aren't you? When you've got 20 books, you're selling for one, and you might sell 20. So you need a bit more of a back catalogue to make advertising more profitable. But just before we finish, I've got to say, I did a book launch to a local library, and I thought that was going to be a good event, and I got a very good reaction there. And there was a tea and coffee morning just before my my launch event, but the heavens opened and nobody went to the coffee morning. So we only had five or six people. They were expecting about 30 or 40 people there, and ended up having 5 or 6 people there.
Oh, that's dismal. I thought, you know what I thought you were going to say? I thought you were going to say that the tea and coffee, it was like an older crowd, and you had that high steamy heat book.
Oh, they love that, don't they? They love that.
Now that would have been memorable. For both of you.
I think I sold 2 books to 5 out of the 5 people. I got sold 2 books.
Oh no, that's so generous though. I mean, not bad.
That's not bad. And then I was talking to my friend about it after, and he said, "Don't people go to libraries because they can read books for free? Is that not the best place to go to sell books, in a library where they can get them for free?"
That's tough. So do you want to know where I was? I mean, this is Canada. My book event was at a hockey arena.
Oh, a hockey.
So talk about culturally appropriate, right? I booked a room it had a YMCA type of thing, and it had a hockey arena and a library, and it had a bunch of rooms that you could book. So I chose that because it was free advertising at the bottom of the stairs. They put a big poster of me, and I had hockey moms who wanted a break from the game coming upstairs, and it worked out quite well.
Up there for thinking, down there for skating. That's it.
Yeah, offer some food and an escape, and it worked.
And plenty of sales there. Plenty of sales, I understand. Yeah.
Yes.
That's brilliant. Jen, we're gonna finish the show there. I'll put some of your links in the description so people can have a look and finding your excellent work. If you stay on the line, just want to have a chat with you about editing. So we'll come to that. So for everybody else, thank you very much for watching the Budding or the podcast. Subscribe and follow the journeys of all these wonderful authors, the pains and struggles I've gone through, and some tips along the way. That's what it's all about. Okay, thanks for watching.